The UCLA men's basketball season's in full swing, and we need you to get to Pauley Pavilion to support the Bruins. Don't miss a single chance to see this year's exciting team, led by Donovan Dent, Eric Daly Jr., Sky Clark, and Tyler Bilodeau. Pauley Pavilion, presented by Westcon Financials, the home of the greatest tradition in all of college basketball. We can't wait to have you join us as the Bruins continue to build on that legacy. With big-time matchups, go to uclabruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today before it's too late. Let's get Pauley rocking.
Good afternoon. Getting right down to business here. We're doing it live, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons, right after Guy Benson at 3 and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Motec on Money. We're live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com, the free KABC app, and on-demand podcast, kbc.com, Apple iTunes, YouTube, all your favorite podcast platforms. A record-shattering start to the new week on Wall Street and what was a nervous and volatile but ultimately winning trading day for stocks. Gold hit a record high above $4,600 an ounce. Silver hit a record high above $86 an ounce. Yep, you heard me. Above 86 an ounce. Stocks hitting record highs today after initially a rough start on reports the U.S. Justice Department and the Federal Reserve are locking horns now. Concerns over Fed independence after prosecutors opened a criminal investigation into Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, according to various reports. The Dow came in for a closing gain of 86 points at 49,590. The S&P 500 up 11 to 69.77, both settling at record highs. The NASDAQ near its all-time high, closing up 62.5 points at 23,734. The yield in the 10-year note at 4.18%. A group of former Fed chairs, Treasury secretaries, and prominent economists speaking out today in support of Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, expressing concerns over the Justice Department's threat of a criminal prosecution at the Fed. Statement signed by former Fed chairs Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, and Alan Greenspan, as well as 4 past Treasury secretaries who served under both Republican and Democratic presidents, read the reported criminal inquiry into the Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell as an unprecedented attempt to use prosecutorial tactics to undermine the Fed's independence. The statement went on to say this is how monetary policy is made in emerging markets with weak institutions, with highly negative consequences for inflation and the functioning of their economies more broadly. The statement continued, it has no place in the U.S., whose greatest strength is the rule of law, which is at the foundation of our economic success. Former Fed Chair Janet Yellen, who also served as Treasury Secretary, later told CNBC today that the investigation compromises the Fed's independence and said she thinks financial markets should be more concerned about a situation she called extremely chilling. Initially, the market sold off, but then, as I mentioned, hit record highs at the close. Price of gold and silver surging to intraday highs, with gold moving above 4,600, silver above 86 an ounce. Right now we see gold just below 4,600 and silver at the moment just below $84 an ounce. Bonds ticked lower, sending the yield in the 10-year note higher to 4.18%. The dollar index also fell in all this. Rattle markets taking in the drama as Fed Chairman Powell said the Justice Department has subpoenaed the Fed, threatening criminal charges over his testimony on building renovations. Powell said the action is an escalation of President Trump's campaign to pressure the Fed into cutting interest rates. Banks also in focus today. President Trump pushing for a 10% cap on credit card rates. Lenders will be in violation of the law if they don't cap interest rates at 10%, according to President Trump. That's what he told reporters over the weekend. Shares of Capital One moving lower by about 7%. Citi and J.P. Morgan Chase also moving lower. All of this as the Consumer Price Index for the month of December is set to be released tomorrow. Markets are expecting no rate cut from the Fed this month after the December jobs report showed continued cooling in the job market without signaling a sharp economic slowdown. The Fed, of course, concerned with the job picture as well as inflation. The Consumer Price Index for December set for release tomorrow morning, with a report expected to show inflation pressures remaining steady in the final month of 2025. The business of show business, the 83rd Golden Globes delivered a notable night for Warner Brothers Discovery, which continues to be the focus of a takeover battle between Netflix and Skydance, Paramount Skydance, with the studio claiming top honors across multiple categories last night, including Best Dramatic Motion Picture and Cinematic and Box Office Achievement. We see Warner Brothers Discovery shares pulling back today by about 50 cents to 28 and change. Netflix moving slightly lower to 89 and change. Paramount Skydance shares slightly higher, up 9 cents at 12.15. Google back in the news, becoming the fourth company now to join the $4 trillion market cap club. This as investor excitement continues relating to Google's latest AI advancements, now the second most valuable company after NVIDIA. We see NVIDIA shares today moving slightly higher, up 12 cents at 184.94 at the close. On the geopolitical front, Venezuela and Iran in focus on Wall Street. And later this hour, I'll be joined by retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, host of the Strategic Risk Assessment Talk Strat podcast on the impact of all of this it's having in the financial markets, especially oil. Will be joined later this hour by prominent oil industry analyst John Kilduff at Again Capital and CNBC contributor, longtime contributor to this program. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, gold, silver, crypto, and the whole works now. Joining us live is Gabriel Wisdom, Managing Director at American Money Management, based right here in Southern California. He's also the author of Wisdom on Value Investing. Gabriel Wisdom, thank you very much for joining us on another record-shattering day on Wall Street.
Well, thank you, Frank. The 2026 outlook does present a what we're calling a bifurcated risk profile. It's mostly good and kind of bad. The bull case certainly rests on solid fundamentals and strong earnings growth and productivity gains and the fiscal stimulus and, of course, the demographic tailwinds of the millennial generation, the largest generation in history, bigger than the baby boomers, and they'll be entering their peak earnings years. So that's very, very bullish. On the bearish side, we have stretched valuations at historically elevated levels, and generally long bull markets, which we've been in now, will motivate investors to take more and more risk. And so we have today, when the news was mostly bad, you saw it in the bond market with rising interest rates, in the metals markets with the defensive plays going higher, gold and silver and all the metals. So maybe investors are just taking the kinds of risks they shouldn't be. I know investment professionals have started to talk about market downturns in a positive way, that they'd be healthy. It would be an opportunity. We haven't had one.
On your live, Gabriel Wisdom with American Money Management. And in the meantime, the stock market, which is a forward-looking mechanism, seems to like what's ahead here with the Dow and the S&P 500 at record highs. The Nasdaq just shy of its all-time high. But most notably, that Burl Ives trade continues post-holiday season. Silver and gold above 4,600 an ounce, and gold above 4,600, silver above $86 an ounce today. What do you make of this tremendous run? Impossible to ignore a run up in the precious metals.
Well, Frank, you've got to wonder, are these very, vertical rising prices of the precious metals a warning sign of some kind that the big boom might be coming to an end? I don't think so. Clearly, the precious metals prices are signaling some recent concerns about excessive stimulus combinations, maybe, or interference in the Federal Reserve's independence, or wars and rumors of wars. But the bottom line is that there's just not enough of it. The geopolitical difficulties in locating new sources of gold, silver, even some of the metals you never think of, like aluminum. Aluminum prices have gained about 38% recently on lower supply, higher demand, and the tariff situation, which was to support domestic production, also dissuaded a lot of importers of aluminum, and so we got a shortage. So that's what's happening with the metals.
All right, and then there's digital gold, so-called. I know you keep an eye on the cryptos, too, which I haven't mentioned yet today, but looks like Bitcoin's hovering around 91,000 here at the moment. Ethereum just below 3,100. Doge is down to 13 cents here. What are your thoughts on the crypto action and all this?
It's hard to ignore. The crypto industry's past 4 years they've been generally good, but quite turbulent. There's been regulatory chaos. Some projects have failed. There's been some big bankruptcies and political mismanagement, certainly. But the year that we're now beginning here, 2026, it doesn't look to be a typical bull market, but it could be. You've got Wall Street's institutional enthusiasm that shapes an ecosystem for crypto, in particular Bitcoin. Coinbase is warning lawmakers that they could withdraw support for a major crypto market structure bill if they have to compete with the banks. The banks are complaining about crypto. They want to claw back some ground that was gained with the Trump administration's Genius Act. So it's a very, very interesting area. But if I had to bet, I'd bet on the banks.
All right, and speaking of the banks, they were in focus today for another reason. President Trump talking about capping credit card interest rates at 10%. There used to be usury laws in place, but right now pretty much the sky's the limit as far as credit card interest rates are concerned. But President Trump wants to cap the rates now at 10%. This impacted the banking stocks today, and credit card companies such as Capital One, Citi, and J.P. Morgan Chase, for example, taking a hit today. What do you make of this, and will we see a credit card interest rate cap at 10%?
Well, I'm not sure about 10%, but credit card interest rates have definitely come up significantly over the last few years. They're well above the rate paid on other consumer loans. The average rate is about 22%, according to the most recent Federal Reserve data I've seen, and that is up quite a bit from the year 2020 when it was around 16%. So it just means there's been a lot of defaults, I would guess. But politicians on both sides of the aisle, not just in the Trump administration, but Democrats like Senator Bernie Sanders, and then there's Josh Hawley, who's a Republican in Missouri. They've taken up this issue and been trying to put in place a credit card cap bill, and they got support. So I don't know. It's definitely a threat to bank earnings.
Very interesting. And somehow those credit card interest rates are not calculated in the inflation numbers we get every month. So that is also to be noted. We will be getting a new reading on consumer prices tomorrow, by the way, for the month of December. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow? And again, when we usually in the past have seen gold and silver move up, it's usually on inflation concerns. And certainly there are concerns around the world, especially Iran, where the currency there has collapsed and they're seeing meteoric inflation. And there are other examples around the world. But what about on the inflation front? What do you see ahead?
Well, I think that inflation is going to be stubbornly high. It may moderate downward just a tick, but I don't expect much. The big news, I think, for interest rates is going to come maybe Wednesday when the Supreme Court rules on the administration's global tariffs. That could provide some relief and help revive some job growth, which has been very, very stagnant. And so that affects the Federal Reserve. If job growth rises, because companies have been reluctant to hire. I mean, for all of last year, employers added just under 500,000 jobs. That's well below the 2 million jobs we saw the prior year in 2024. It's the weakest job growth year outside of the recession of the early 2000s. So, and some say that it has a lot to do with tariffs. So, and that affects inflation. So I'd say don't expect much tomorrow, but Wednesday will be a big day with the Supreme Court.
That's right. That's the other big story that'll be happening this week. It's widely expected January 14th. That's the day we will be getting the Supreme Court ruling on the legality of President Trump's tariffs, which could potentially be a market-rattling event, right? What do you think is going to happen this week?
Well, they're saying they've got other options at the Trump administration. And, it's not unprecedented for presidents to impose or at least persuade Congress to impose tariffs, but the way this has been done was somewhat arbitrary. We had the so-called Liberation Day in April, and that, that surprised a lot of people. I mean, I get it. We've raised some money, but is it okay just to bulldoze your way to legislation without Congress? I think that's at the heart of the argument.
All right. We're going to be talking geopolitics later this hour with what's happening in Venezuela and as well as in Iran. Certainly the oil markets are keeping an eye on that as well. In the meantime, the price of oil has been quite tame, below $60 a barrel, although it did move a bit higher today. What about oil in all this?
Frank, that's a major component in, configuring an inflation rate. And we had a very significant meeting with some of America's top oil executives in the White House, and the president and CEOs of ExxonMobil and Chevron and ConocoPhillips and others met, and there was some reluctance to spend a lot of money going into Venezuela because the infrastructure there it's so rough. The challenges, as Woods from ExxonMobil said, the challenges make the country's oil uninvestable unless changes are made for some protections from the U.S. government. But anyway, the most bullish oil company about the opportunities in Venezuela certainly is Chevron because they're already there. But I think ExxonMobil has been in and out of Venezuela at least twice, and their assets were seized. So, twice burned, you get a little hesitant.
Any specific places where you are putting money now and or taking off the table?
Well, Frank, you mentioned the Warner Brothers situation with Netflix and Paramount. I think there's still a lot of play there. And so I'm looking at not only Warner Brothers Discovery, if we get some disappointment and the shares go down, but I'm looking at other companies that will be spinning off divisions. Sony is one of them. FedEx is another. Keurig Dr. Pepper is yet another. And then I mentioned aluminum. There's a very old company that trades publicly that has a history dating back to the end of the 19th century, Crown Holdings. This is a global manufacturer of aluminum cans and packaging and so forth. Trades at very low price earnings multiple with good fundamentals. I'm looking at it, haven't bought any, but Crown Holdings, CCK is interesting.
Gabriel Wisdom, thank you very much for taking the call and hitting on all the important points here this afternoon. Gabriel Wisdom, Managing Director at American Money Management, based right here in Southern California, and also author of Wisdom on Value Investing. Gabriel Wisdom, thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Shopify is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going through. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period for 3 months at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
The UCLA women's basketball season is one you don't want to miss. Your top 10 Bruins are well on their way to another Final Four run. We need you to get to Pauley to support this incredible team. Led by Lauren Betts, Gabriela Jaquez, and Kiki Rice, newcomers Gianna Neepkins and Charlize Ledger-Walker. This group plays an exciting brand of basketball and wins. The time is now to come to see these stars in action. Big-time matchups are coming. Go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today. Can't wait to see you in Westwood cheering on the Bruins.
American Skyjacker tells the story of D.B. Cooper copycat Martin McNally, who hijacked a plane and jumped out with $500,000. But that's just the start of this epic true crime saga. Now, American Skyjacker is an action-packed documentary available on all major platforms. Go to AmericanSkyjacker.com to subscribe to the podcast and watch the film. And look out for a new bonus episode of the podcast coming soon. American Skyjacker. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
As we await the Consumer Price Index report on inflation first thing tomorrow morning, also looks like the Federal Reserve locking horns with the U.S. Justice Department based on a number of reports. The group of former Fed chairs, Treasury secretaries, and prominent economists, as I mentioned earlier, speaking out in support of the Fed Chair Jerome Powell, expressing concerns over the Justice Department's threat of a criminal prosecution at the Federal Reserve. Also, we're expecting a big ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court. Could be a number of rulings, as a matter of fact, on Wednesday, January 14th. That's the indication that the Supreme Court has revealed could be the big day. We'll get the ruling on President Trump's tariffs and the legality of the tariffs, and that could certainly be a market-rattling or market-impacting event. In the meantime, we see the tech names back in focus with Google on the rise at more than $3 at $3.31 and change today. Apple also higher by 88 cents at $2.60 and change. And NVIDIA up 12 cents at the close at $184.94. Checking the cryptos now, we see Bitcoin hovering just above 91,000, Ethereum just below 3,100, and Doge at the moment at 13 cents. OTAC Money continues here, 790 KABC. Venezuela and now Iran in focus on Wall Street. Iran drawing tens of thousands of pro-government demonstrators to the streets. Iranian state television showing the images of demonstrators in Tehran or the Islamic Revolution Square there in the capital. The broadcasters did not address the underlying anger over the nation's ailing economy and the collapse of the rial. That's the Iranian currency. That could be another reason why we saw the price of gold shoot above $4,600 an ounce today, and silver hitting a record high above $86 an ounce. Following all these developments very closely, joining us live now is retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, host of the Strategic Risk Assessment Talk Strat podcast. He happens to be based right here in Southern California. Colonel, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Oh, thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful to have you with us, and let's focus on the top story here, Iran. Give us your assessment of what's happening here, and President Trump indicating that if they start killing more people, that the U.S. could get directly involved.
Well, this may be the biggest protest we've seen so far. There's just fundamental economics behind this. All the anger from 3 years ago about, the death of a young woman for not wearing her hijab, all of that is still there. But now you have this free fall with the rial. They can't, and the other part is the central bank cut off the cash flows for small businesses. For example, all those stores at the bazaars and stuff, they can't actually do business. So right now the country's economy is moribund. And then, of course, dealing with the aftermath of the 12-day war, where basically the government could not protect the country. They couldn't defend it. The Israeli Air Force was flying all over the place, hitting at will. The U.S. came in, hit some targets. It has just fundamentally undermined the confidence of the Iranian people and the government. And so I think this is huge, what's going on there.
See it tonight, read about it tomorrow, but hear it now on Motec on Money, live on the air with Hal Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel. And I don't know if you saw the reports today, Reuters and others reporting that Tehran says it was keeping communication channels with Washington open as President Trump considered how to respond to Iran's deadly crackdown on the nationwide protests there. What kind of military action might we see if the president decides to go in that direction?
Well, the big challenge is, and this is what President Trump had to actually tell Bibi Netanyahu a couple of weeks ago, was if they strike, they could actually end up setting back this anti-regime movement by kind of fomenting a big nationalist thing. That's what we're concerned about, too, is if we strike, what do we hit? What we don't want to do is do something where it resurges nationalism behind the regime and basically undermines what the protesters are doing. On the other hand, we want to do something that shows our resolve and our support. So what I'm thinking is we'll probably be looking at very traditional military targets, and of those, probably more towards the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is really the Praetorian Guard of the theocratic regime.
Of course, Iran borders Iraq, which also they had that long war, right? What's going on in Iraq? We haven't heard anything what's going on there. I know your service included Iraq, right? And what about their potential role in all this?
Well, Iraq is dealing with some internal issues. Right now, we're involved with negotiations with the Iraqi government about basically demilitarizing some of these Shiite militia groups, some of the these affiliates of the Iranian regime, and frankly, with those groups looking at what's going on in Iran, I don't think they want to garner our ire, so to speak, by doing things. They have attacked us. They have attacked our troops. We've attacked our bases over there before. So there might be a realignment within Iraq away from this Shiite extremist that was backed by the Al-Quds force and the Iranian regime into more traditional political elements. And that's very advantageous for us across the board.
Very interesting. And, of course, last time we spoke, we were talking about Venezuela. And since then, the dictator of Venezuela was taken out by very elite U.S. forces and had an arraignment in a courtroom in New York City. What about what's happening in Venezuela here at the moment?
Well, that's first off, I just want to say operationally, that was one of the most brilliant military operations in all history. It was just phenomenal what was accomplished there. And we keep finding out more and more about some of the very advanced techniques that were used. And I can't even go into all the science, the physics, the psychology of what we did, but let's just say it just doesn't get any better. So on that role, it was very good. Right now, the regime, what's there now, Delcy Rodriguez has to figure out what she's going to do. I don't think she wants the second strike. There is negotiations. On the other hand, it's killing the Chavista movement because they're having to negotiate with the country that is essentially their big enemy. Their raison d'etre, why they are there, is against the West. So I think it's going to be very interesting in negotiations. Hopefully we won't have to hit them again, but we are stopping their tankers. We're stopping their revenue flow, and that's putting tremendous pressure on them to basically come to terms.
All right, help us understand how the place is being run. The president says we're going to be running Venezuela. What's really happening there?
Well, we're not day-to-day operationally running it. It's still the government that's in place is running it. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically put a framework where the U.S. oil companies that develop the oil fields or are running the oil fields that could potentially put the oil fields back into full operation again can step in. But to do that, as the president of Exxon just said, he said it's uninvestable right now, which is a way of saying that until things become more stabilized, until there's less risk involved, they can't go in there and do that. The problem for President Trump, the problem for the administration is to put those things in place to get rid of that risk or to reduce that risk to a point where we can go back in and do all those things we want to accomplish.
And last time we spoke, we talked about how the U.S. took out the Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega back in 1989, also over the holidays back in those days, after he banged a machete on a podium and declared war on the United States. You remember those days, too, and a lot of comparisons about what happened just recently to back what happened in those days. What do you think is going to happen with the prosecution now of this guy who was just taken out of Venezuela?
Well, this is going to be interesting. Obviously, it looks from everything we're seeing, and I'm not a lawyer, but from everything we're seeing, they're trying to use the basically sovereign immunity defense to say, look, he was a sovereign head of state. Of course, our position has been all along, going way back, that no, he was not legitimately elected. It was a rigged election. We have the documentation to prove that it was a rigged election, so he wasn't an elected leader. So the question the courts are going to have to say is, well, was he a sovereign leader by some other way? And this is not the first time we've had to work through this. Manuel Noriega is a case study on how this is done, and he was very successfully prosecuted with one little difference. The Panamanian government that came in afterwards basically said, no, he does not have sovereign immunity. The question is, and I'm sure some are working on this, is will the Venezuelan government do the same thing with Maduro? Will they turn around and say that he and his wife do not have sovereign immunity? That would be a fascinating development if it happens, and it might be part of the discussion. That's something I just haven't heard yet.
That is very interesting. And Cuba, of course, closely aligned with Venezuela. Now there's talk there could be some big changes in Cuba. Of course, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of people expected Cuba also to be finally freed from communism. What do you think is going to happen with Cuba now?
Cuba is in horrible shape. Well, one of the things that's been happening is these big hurricanes that come in and basically ravage the Caribbean. They've been going across Cuba, causing tremendous damage. Well, the government is in such dire straits, they really haven't been able to go back and address it with the response and particularly the recovery necessary to really fix things. So they've been on tenuous ropes or tenuous situation there for quite some time. Cuba has now become very dependent on Venezuela for both oil and cash. And in exchange for that, they provide security services like protecting Maduro, which didn't work out so well, in Venezuela. Now they're cut off. We're stopping those tankers from getting the oil in there. They're not getting the cash proceeds coming in. So Cuba is in a very desperate situation. That's what President Trump alludes to, is they need to make a deal. They need to do something. Basically, the U.S. has tremendous leverage on Cuba right now, and Russia just seems to be unable to step up to do much about it.
All right, and last but not least, Russia and Ukraine. Briefly, give us an update on what you see happening there.
Well, it's still fierce fighting. The Russians are making, small strides at phenomenal costs into Ukraine. The Europeans are really stepping up. The Ukrainians are having tremendous effect with some of their deep strike weapons, whether it's their missiles or deep strike drones. One of the things that's kind of missed is that Ukraine is now hitting tankers well outside of Ukraine. They've hit them down in the Mediterranean. They've hit them in the Caspian Sea. They're hitting these Russian Shadow Fleet tankers, and that has a big impact on the risk portfolio that the Shadow Fleet operates on. And that's, of course, that is the core cash, the revenue source for the Russian state. So there's a lot going on there. The other problem, though, is obviously it's a very costly war. It's wearing down the Ukrainians, and the Europeans have to step up and step up fast to fill in that gap in order to keep them going on the battlefield.
Colonel, thank you very much for taking the call. We'll keep an open line to you as we follow all these developments very, very closely. We thank retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, national security analyst, host of the Strategic Risk Assessment Talk, or STRAT, as it's known, STRAT podcast, and he's based right here in Southern California. Colonel, thank you very much for taking the call live with us here this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
The UCLA women's basketball season is one you don't want to miss. Your top 10 Bruins are well on their way to another Final Four run. We need you to get to Pauley to support this incredible team. Led by Lauren Betts, Gabriela Jaquez, and Kiki Rice, newcomers Gianna Neepkins and Charlize Ledger-Walker. This group plays an exciting brand of basketball and wins. The time is now to come to see these stars in action. Big-time matchups are coming. Go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today. Can't wait to see you in Westwood cheering on the Bruins.
Get ready for The Rush with Max Crosby.
It's time.
Your all-access pass into the heart of the NFL.
This is the National Football League, and they don't play around. You got to be smart.
All-pro defensive end Max Crosby takes you beyond the field with exclusive insights.
I could say this because I've played them.
This is The Rush.
You guys already know what time it is. It was fire, and we'll be right back on the pod, and we'll be talking about it next week.
The Rush with Max Crosby. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Thank you very much. Uncertainty about what's going to happen in Venezuela ultimately, as well as the new situation unfolding in Iran with protests there and the government cracking down on protesters. The price of oil moving higher, selling at a 7-week high today, but still below $60 a barrel. Joining us live now and following all these developments very closely is prominent oil industry analyst John Kilduff at Again Capital and CNBC contributor, longtime contributor to this program. John, thank you very much for coming to the line and take it from the top. Give us your assessment here on the situation in Iran, first of all.
Well, that's the one that's on the boil right now, Frank, for sure, especially given President Trump's statements just a little while ago that he's going to tack now a 25% extra tariff on countries that do business with Iran. Now, that is the usual rogues gallery of nations. You're talking about China, so would have another 25% tariff on their goods to the U.S., India, UAE. Somewhat to a degree, the European Union countries do some trade with Iran. We'll have to see how this sorts out, but it's another ratcheting up. I will say this, Frank, I'm not sure that military action there is imminent, partly because for the first time I can remember in a while, there isn't a U.S. carrier strike group in the Middle East at the moment. So I'm not sure we have the full capacity to do what we would normally be able to do, but I leave that to the military experts. As far as the oil market goes, we're nervous. You've seen WTI prices touching $60 a barrel now again, and Brent crude is almost at 65. Iran pumps about 4 million barrels a day. About 2 million of that gets exported. If you want prices to go down towards the low 50s and below, we need those barrels. They're not critical. It won't cause a shortage. There shouldn't be any issue, but that'll certainly be the thing to watch. As far as Venezuela goes, the bloom is off the rose there a bit. You saw ExxonMobil's reluctance at the meeting with President Trump last week about not wanting or desiring to go into Venezuela, calling it uninvestable. I think Chevron still holds the key to several 100,000 more barrels a day than they're already getting. That would help lower prices. But for now, it's a cauldron in the oil market, Frank, and that's why you've seen these prices rebound the way you have. I mean, we were looking to break below $50 a barrel as we ended last year. Now we kick off the new year, we're back towards 60.
See it tonight, read about it tomorrow, but hear it now on Motec on Money, live on the air with prominent oil analyst John Kilduff at Again Capital and CNBC contributor. John, let me ask you this. We see the latest reports, President Trump weighing military action on Iran. How would that look? Of course, Iran's neighbor is Iraq. We went in there in a big way. What kind of military action is being possibly talked about in your circles if the U.S. were to do something with Iran?
It would be strategic, Frank, not unlike what we saw with Maduro, what they refer to, undiplomatically as a decapitation. The word is they want Khomeini out, and there has to be some retribution against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, so the IRGC. Those facilities could get targeted. If we can break them, remove Khomeini, regime change would actually be pretty likely. So it's not going to be a boots on the ground shock and awe situation like we saw with Iraq. This time the people ostensibly seem like they would welcome our intervention and support us, not like we went through with Iraq. But again, when we engineer changes of government in that part of the world, it's a dicey proposition. So we'll have to see. But I think that getting rid of Khomeini, hitting the IRGC would be a positive move. And look, if we can bring Iran back into the fold and Venezuela back into the fold, I think U.S. drivers would have a lot of lower gasoline prices in their future.
And the Shah of Iran's son, the Shah of Iran, of course, was deposed following the Islamic Revolution in February of 1979. The Shah's son now taking a very high profile on social media. And is he the guy that would take over there?
I don't know, Frank. I have qualms about that. But if he's the best we can do, I guess we'll take him. And particularly if he'll suit our interests and help the people. I think the people deserve a new leader that's, popularly elected and the like, and maybe some hint of democracy at the very least. I'm not sure that they're going back to the future with the Shah. His family is the way to go. But hey, we'll take what we can get in that part of the world.
All right. What about that big meeting at the White House? It was just last Friday, actually, that the head of Chevron, ExxonMobil, and all the big oil names, Schlumberger. I didn't realize until the guy mentioned it that they changed their name recently, so we don't have to say Schlumberger anymore. But what about that big meeting and what came out of it?
Finally, a gift from one of the big oil companies, Frank. It's just SLB now. You're right. But no, I think what the ExxonMobil CEO said about Venezuela being uninvestable and they got burned there twice. I mean, when I talked to you last week or recently about this, these companies have lost billions. Conoco, Exxon, even Chevron have lost billions in there because of nationalizations, and their investments getting stolen from them. So there is a reluctance, although if anybody can browbeat them into going back in there, it's President Trump, that's for sure. And I think that's what we're looking at. There were two other companies that didn't get a lot of fanfare, Frank, that I'm watching. It's called Trafigura and Glencore. They're sort of like commodity brokers. They facilitate transport and tankers of oil from Venezuela and other, less desirable places to places like China. They get the deal done. They get the product shipped and sold on the global market. They are heavily involved, and I'm hearing that they are in the process of engineering what could be a bit of a ramp up of Venezuelan exports to various places that would process that crude oil. So that was a good sign.
All right, from the consumer standpoint, here in California, we're probably paying the highest in the country, and while the rest of the nation's enjoying very low gas prices nowadays, and as the price of oil has been below $60 a barrel, Obviously, we have issues here in California with a couple of refineries closing. What do you see ahead for gas prices here in California?
We're going to have to see how bad it gets, Frank. One thing that'll happen, as I've talked to you, is that you should be able to attract fuel supplies from Asia, basically. A long way to go, extra cost. But you should get supply. And I think, again, to the extent the California market gets very expensive for gasoline, you will see encouragement and possibly Trump intervention again here to get pipeline flows out of the Gulf and from Arizona out your way. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm just hoping and keeping my fingers crossed based upon what I'm hearing that there could be some supply relief, which should help, take away some of the worst case scenarios here for your pricing at the pump.
All right. From an investment standpoint, where are you placing your bets at the moment?
Well, I think you see here from what's going on that you want to be with the majors. I know Exxon took a hit today, for example, on this, but you've seen Chevron stock really fly higher here because I think there is a path forward for them in particular with Venezuela, and that could be a boon for them, right to their bottom line. So Chevron, if you want to play Venezuela, that's the one. But the U.S. refiners are going to do great too, because all of a sudden that their feedstock, the crude that either comes from Canada or down the road from Venezuela, it's going to get lowered in price. And so their profit margins are going to be terrific. So you're talking about Valero, you're talking about Phillips 66. U.S. shale drillers, however, they could be having a problem here. There will be increased competition for them from several sources now. So I'm not sure that they're going to be able to weather the low price storm that I still believe is coming for the industry.
All right, and where do you see the price of oil go from here?
Frank, we're going to go probably test above 60. We have to get through this Iran situation. But once the smoke clears on Iran and Venezuela, we'll be heading right back down. I think by March, April time period, we'll be at around $48 a barrel. All
right, and we'll all be paying attention on Wednesday when the Supreme Court rules on the legality of President Trump's tariffs. So that could also be a market-impacting event. So we're going to keep an open line to you on all of this. John, thank you very, very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
My pleasure, Frank. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is John Kilduff, oil industry analyst at Again Capital and CNBC contributor, longtime contributor here on Motec on Money on 790 KABC. Stay tuned now for the 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here, 790 KABC.
The UCLA women's basketball season is one you don't want to miss. Your top 10 Bruins are well on their way to another Final Four run. We need you to get to Pauley to support this incredible team. Led by Lauren Betts, Gabriela Jaquez, and Kiki Rice, newcomers Gianna Neepkins and Charlize Ledger-Walker. This group plays an exciting brand of basketball and wins. The time is now to come to see these stars in action. Big-time matchups are coming. Go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today. Can't wait to see you in Westwood cheering on the Bruins.